Hello, everyone. I'm George from Ireland. So, I'm going to talk about Trump's mishandling of coronavirus in my précis of his presidency. So, it was a most unfortunate concatenation of circumstances when a mind virus coincided with a physical virus. Trumpism metastasized across the American body politic and indeed the body politic of a number of other countries, with the Trump of the tropics in Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, with Orban Viktor in Hungary, and so forth. But coronavirus broke out in the People's Republic of China in November 2019. Now, Trump had briefings about it the following January. We know, although he has the attention span of a mayfly, he publicly lavished praise upon the Chinese for their supposedly first class cooperation on this disease. Now, subsequently, Trump rounded upon Cathay for their concealment of the disease, their subterfuge, and so forth. Now, either Trump was too stupid to realize what the Chinese were doing, or he was lying to the American people yet again. So later on, he supposedly excoriated them for lying about the scale and severity of COVID-19. He was striving to shift the blame from his own chronic mismanagement of the situation. He thought he could deflect culpability from his blindingly blatant errors of judgment and outright lies in relation to coronavirus. He thought he could get out of it by his old standby of scapegoating the foreigners. The thing was, in this case, his excuse was not without foundation. In January 2020, Joe Biden and others told the president to prepare for coronavirus, and the country was not in a posture of preparedness. Anyway, in February 2020, coronavirus reached the United States, as had been forecast by all sorts of people, even non-experts like Joe Biden. Trump said that it was a hoax. That is the word he used, hoax, saying that it did not exist. Yet another staggering, jaw-dropping lie, and this one was really consequential. The repercussions of that were the deaths of many, many people who didn't take it seriously, who should have done, precisely because the president told them that. And people have a tendency to trust those in authority, like the president. They think he knows what he's doing. They think he's got the best interest of the public at heart. Of course, in Trump's case, they couldn't be more wrong. So then Trump told people that cases would be close to zero by the 12th of March, 2020. In the end, millions of Americans had caught coronavirus by that stage, and we all know that well over 250,000 have died from it now, roughly 300,000. And much of this is due to Trump. Any president would have presided over some deaths in this situation, but the death toll didn't need to be anything nearly that high. America really was number one in one thing, and that was coronavirus deaths. So it really was a MAGA moment. This hecatomb of putrefying cadavers at Trump's feet. Anyway, planes from China were permitted to land in the United States after the outbreak of coronavirus, after China started locking down. And Trump allowed people who were not US citizens into the country. No one was tested or quarantined. You might think it was a right to allow people in, but at least test them, at least quarantine them. So Republicans are against lockdowns, against masks, against vaccines, against quarantines, against travel bans. So the Republican platform really was death to America. So Trump procrastinated about declaring lockdown. He was a modern-day Nero fiddling while the disease burned through the population. He has other neuronic traits, such as his incestuous lust for his daughter, his debauchery, his avarice, his verbally awarding himself honours, CF Nero at the Olympics, his odium towards religious minorities, and so forth. So the president belatedly supported a lockdown. He held a press conference in which he rambled nonsensically, as he usually does. He proved yet again he was totally devoid of empathy. Trump voiced not the least bit of sympathy for those slain by this disease or those being bereaved. Instead, he seemed to regard himself as the principal victim, and surely feeling sorry for yourself is unedifying this situation. And he moaned that the press were not cheerleaders for him, as though that's their duty. Anyway, so as I said, the US had the highest number of cases in the world, but then the United States went one better, had the highest per capita number of coronavirus deaths in the world. It's true that some European lands at certain points had an even higher rate. Belgium did, but partly because it's got a very high population density, meaning the disease spread by wildfire. The United States, having such a gigantic land area, has a low population density and a commensurately far lower rate per capita deaths now. So it took an astonishing degree of negligence, of stupidity and incompetence on behalf of the White House to cause this malady to spread so widely in such a widely scattered population. So the Donald boasted he had stunned epidemiologists and virologists with his in-depth knowledge and understanding of their fields of expertise. And that's a textbook example of the Dunning-Kruger effect. His intellectual poverty rendered him unable to understand or assess his own academic shortcomings. He's always ultra-crepidarian, mouthing off his uninformed musings on multiple topics. That's why you can be, number one in self-confidence, but absolutely rock bottom in ability in any area, because you can't even analyze your own inability. That's what self-esteem culture has gone. That's been taken too far. So in other countries, constantly overstating your incompetence is regarded as distasteful and even contemptible. But in the United States, quite a few people hugely overrate themselves. So Trump's overconfidence and indeed superiority complex is an extreme example of a wider malaise in American life. Then Trump said people should inject disinfectant into their lungs. He was urging people to commit suicide. It was a statement so criminally stupid as to defy belief. He was the Jim Jones of the Republican Party. Tens of millions of people have drunk deep of his political Kool-Aid. Fortunately, his cognitively subnormal supporters are seldom so staggeringly stupid as to believe the words their idol says. They don't all believe everything he says. Trump later denied saying what he had said live on national television, and his British enabler, Nigel Farage, joined in that and said that Trump did not say what he did say. So many people, Trumpists, claim the death toll was hugely inflated, that the statistics were massaged rather roughly. Some have said it was coronavirus was a plot to bring down the president, and so on. So nothing was too blatantly untrue or stark raving bonkers for them. At the ill-named Liberty University in Lynchburg, Virginia, that Jerry Falwell Jr., he was disseminating that trope and not wanting any social distancing in his campus. Well, I suppose they'll all go to Jesus that bit sooner if they die. So the president wanted to get rid of lockdown. He considered the economy more important. Now, despite saying lockdown was dreadful and should be ended, he did not actually end it. Now, it's true states have a wide degree of latitude. He couldn't impose a lockdown on states. He could encourage them to do so and end it, and he, of course, has a great deal of sway. What Trump could control was the federal government. The president had the power to get people to work from home. For a long time, he refused to do that. But remember, he was very willing to shut down the federal government in 2019 in a failed attempt to build his moronic wall. So so the wall was worth shutting down the federal government, but not saving millions of lives of your people? Now, as I say, roughly 300,000 Americans have died of it. It could have been a lot higher. It could have been much lower if he'd been sensible. We didn't know how much it was going to spread back then, so you had to err on the side of circumspection. And I realised that we have to consider civil liberty as well, and the economy as well. I'm not an extreme lockdown person, but there needed to be some sort of social distancing. Anyway, so how many deaths are attributable to the Trump campaign? Thousands would be a conservative estimate, because against medical advice, Trump held rallies. These were super spreader events. So Trumpism really is a virus vector in every sense. People had to sign waivers before they got in saying they wouldn't sue the Trump campaign if they caught coronavirus there. So the campaign knew it was spreading the disease. And if he was asked about coronavirus at his rallies, Trump said it didn't worry him because he was far from the audience. Oh, so it's okay if they catch the disease, just so long as he doesn't. There was no social distancing, very few wore masks. He mocked Joe Biden for wearing one. So Trump was recorded by Bob Woodward saying he was playing down coronavirus. So he knew it was more serious than he let on. When confronted with that months later, he confirmed what he'd said earlier. Later, he said he'd played it up. So he'd underrated it and overrated it at the same time. What? He'd flat out contradict himself again. So it's completely incoherent, moronic, and illogical. And of course, that will impress a lot of Trumpists. So Trump blamed the World Health Organization for coronavirus. Now, how does that possibly work? So, and eventually said that they weren't going to fund it. He pulled the US out of WHO, and WHO was exactly what the world needed to stop the disease, to coordinate efforts to distribute aid efficiently. The USA could not stop the disease at the border. The United States is only safe when the rest of the world is safe from the disease. Despite the best efforts of the USA, can't prevent all illegal immigrants. They could have coronavirus. They could bring it into the country. If coronavirus exists abroad, it's going to be brought into the United States. So Trump demanded that US health agencies deliver good news. He told them to approve a vaccine when it hadn't been properly tested. His political appointees, who had no medical credentials whatsoever, contradicted the Center for Disease Control. Trump then said the CDC was a deep state and it was a conspiracy trying to ruin him. So yet more absolute toxic nonsense coming out of them. Wow, it just beggars belief. It's just endless, the incessant lying. So then in 2000 and on the 2nd of October, there was a righteous stroke of an all-wise providence. Trump had to go to hospital with coronavirus. He was hoisted his own petard. His imprudence had led him to contract the disease. It was poetic justice. He got the health care that he denied to millions of other people because he used his influence to take away affordable care. The White House was not clear on when or how he caught the disease, so he could have been spreading it to others for some time. Didn't let people know he needed to get tested or isolated. He then had himself driven in a car outside the hospital to wave to his fans. Therefore, he was exposing the staff in the car to that disease, right? There was no need for him to go on that car journey. The White House contradicted themselves, contradicting what the doctor said about the president's well-being. In Florida, the Republican governor, Ron DeSantis, he banned business premises from requiring people to wear masks. So people are going to be incarcerated for saving lives. Wow. Every country's had coronavirus deaths, but the USA had the highest number in the world by a long, long way. It had almost the highest per capita number in the world to date. Easily half of these are directly attributed to Trump's policies. And by the time lockdown had started in the end of March 2020, the scale and seriousness of the disease was already very apparent. Tens of thousands of people in China and Europe had already died of the disease. Anyway, in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic, Black Lives Matter movement was revived. People were outraged by yet another police murder of an unarmed black man. So some BLM people called for the defunding of the police. A few Democrat politicians said the police shouldn't have military-grade weapons. There's a thing called clothed cognizance, because if you are accoutred as the police and you're equipped accoutred as soldiers and equipped with military paraphernalia, that military garb and so on makes you think that you are a special forces soldier and start to behave like it and perceive every encounter as a battle, try and demonstrate excessive levels of bellicosity. So Trump tried to claim that the Democrats would scrap the police, which is, of course, a canard. So Trump appealed to knuckle-dragging white supremacists. They sometimes cunningly call themselves white nationalists. And these people loathe BLM. But, I mean, I'm not on board with all of the BLM agenda, but I do agree with them that the gravamen of the case, unarmed black people shouldn't be murdered by the police, and then the police get off scot-free. That's it, and it happens a lot in the United States. I'm not saying the police are always wrong to shoot someone who's black, but there are many cases where they are dead wrong. Anyway, so the word socialism is toxic in middle America, and the Republicans, they skillfully exploited the situation. They managed to persuade huge swathes of the population that the Democrats are socialist and anti-police, and yet more blatant nonsense. But if Republicans are really anti-socialists, they would refuse farm subsidies. Well, they wouldn't allow them to be voted through. They would not take subventions for the red states, because that is socialism. And when we talk about democratic socialism, they're trying to pretend that North Korea and Norway are the same thing. And if North Korea is so evil, which it is, why does Trump adulate its tyrants so much? I thought he was meant to be an anti-socialist. Anyway, Biden ran as a moderate. He was an establishment figure. He was vituperated and subject to contumely all the same. He was reproached as a far leftist, even though that was provable bunkum. Anyway, so then his running mate had it even worse. She's half black and half Indian, obviously a woman, and so she was the target of racial odium and all sorts of smears. And then Trump went back to his old trick, like he did with Obama, and suggested that Kamala Harris was not American and had no right to be elected to any public office, despite having been Attorney General of California. So it was birtherism Mark II. I mean, not even a dog whistle. The racial overtones of that are just so obvious. So some left field democratic ideas were seized on by the GOP. Andrew Yang said that we ought to be universal basic income, but that was never a Biden-Harris policy. Anyway, the Republican Party said universal basic income would be disastrous. Well, only one state has such a law, and that's the reddest of states, Alaska, Sarah Palin's state. Anyway, that's enough for me about how Trump made coronavirus so much worse. Bye.